Hello and welcome back to the channel. Today I wanted to talk about the difference between the Christian and non-Christian views of history and how that segues into what I think is a powerful argument for Christianity. So some days ago I made a short Twitter thread talking about how the Christian view of reality does not allow for ultimate mystery while the non-Christian view does. I thought maybe I should expand on that. By the way, you all should go follow me on Twitter right after you like this video and subscribe to the channel. Anyways, we can think of history as the series of temporal events. Basically, everything that happens in time can be seen as part of a larger whole, which we might call history. Now, the Christian and non-Christian have very different views about the nature of history. The Christian obviously believes in the biblical God, and the Bible tells us that God is sovereign and exerts providential control over every event in the world, no matter how minute it seems to be. God has a plan according to which he orders the events of history. So there is nothing that happens in time that surprises God. There is nothing that happens in time which he didn't foreordain and foreknow. The Bible says that he knows the end from the beginning. There are no unknowns for God when it comes to the temporal series of events. The same cannot be said for us, though. Obviously, we humans are finite and our knowledge is limited. No one knows exhaustively what the future holds. For us, history is a mysterious thing. There's a lot about the future and the past and even the present that we simply do not and probably cannot know. What the Christian worldview teaches is that this element of mystery is not metaphysically ultimate. There may be mystery on the finite human level, but there is no mystery at the level of the infinite. There is no mystery for God. So the Christian can say that reality is not ultimately mysterious. There is a person for whom nothing is shrouded in mystery. The non-Christian cannot claim the same thing. He does not believe that a sovereign creator and sustainer of the world exists. So for him, mystery is metaphysically ultimate. For him, there is only one level of being, the finite level. For him, there is no person that exists beyond the finite and is able to get a holistic view of history. So for the non-Christian, history is something that will always retain an element of mystery. But you see, this is a problem, a huge problem. And the problem, simply put, is that universal principles cannot be justified if reality is ultimately mysterious. Let me explain. Universal principles, simply speaking, are principles that apply to more than one thing. They can also be called general statements. In philosophy, universals are normally contrasted with particulars, but we don't need to get into all that. Just understand that particulars are concrete or individual things, and universal principles are principles which apply to multiple particulars. An example would be, all bachelors are unmarried men. This statement isn't just about a particular bachelor, it's about bachelors in general. Simple reflection would reveal just how crucial a role universal principles and general statements play in our thinking. It is impossible to reason just in terms of particulars. We have to make generalizations and universal statements. We reason about particular things by relating them to some class or universal category. This is true even in our daily lives where we presuppose the uniformity of nature. The uniformity of nature has been formulated in various ways. One can say that it is the idea that the future will resemble the past, or that causal relations apply uniformly across the universe, such that when sufficiently similar situations recur, similar effects will follow. Regardless of how you conceive of it, it is obvious that it is a universal principle. Its scope is beyond particulars, and we rely on it in science and our daily lives. Everyone assumes that nature is uniform. When you walk down the street, you believe that gravity will keep working to keep you on the ground. You believe that bread wouldn't suddenly become poison. You believe that the laws of physics will continue to act as they have. Everyone presupposes the uniformity of nature. But is there any rational basis for believing this principle? In order to be justified in believing universal principles, one must be able to verify their universality. Now, universal principles have varying scopes, but the most important universals, like the uniformity of nature, are such that their scope transcends time and space. If so, how can the universality of such principles be verified? Definitely, as finite creatures, we are constrained by time and space, and our experience does not transcend time. Moreover, if we take the non Christian account of reality to be true, then history is ultimately mysterious. As such, we can never know what influence future events would have on the validity of our universal principles. It may turn out that the universals used in our thinking are rendered false by the discovery of new facts. Since we cannot rule out this possibility, we can never be confident that our universal principles are actually universal. At best, we would have to qualify them and say something like, this principle has been shown to apply in my experience thus far. But if we cannot be assured of the universality of such principles, we can never be confident that they apply even in the narrow domain of our experience. It's just like Dr. Greg Bonson said, quote, if there is a segment of reality that he is not aware of and cannot account for or understand, and who could know how extensive it is, then he cannot be sure that there are not factors that are relevant to or would interfere with the adequacy of the explanations he has offered for what he experiences. If his explanatory principles cannot be thought of as universal, but are subject to possible qualification, he cannot say in any particular case that it is appropriate to use those principles or that he is not being arbitrary or short-sighted. End quote. That is, if we cannot confidently say that our universal principles are actually universal, then what use are they? Anytime we proceed on the assumption that these principles are true, we act arbitrarily and irrationally because we have no reason to do so. This is the conclusion we must reach if we accept that reality is ultimately mysterious. We must accept that essential principles like the uniformity of nature are unjustified, and this renders science and our everyday beliefs arbitrary and unjustified. To see the problem better, let us consider an analogy. Imagine standing in front of a warp portal which shoots out random objects at random intervals. You know nothing about the mechanisms behind the portal or the principles which determine what objects pop out of it. In other words, the warp portal as a whole is ultimately mysterious. All you have to go on are the objects it has shut out already. Now, do you think you can form any rationally justified beliefs about what objects would pop out next? Would any explanatory principle that you propose be anything more than a wild guess? This is the same epistemological situation we would be in if history was ultimately mysterious. There would be no way to justify the explanatory principles we rely on. Guesswork and speculation would be the best we could hope for, and justify true belief becomes impossible. The only way to justify universal principles is to have a holistic perspective on history. One must know all about the events in the temporal series and how they relate to one another if one is to be able to verify the universality of explanatory principles. But if God does not exist, no one can have this holistic perspective. This is why the non-Christian position runs into problems. On the Christian view, this holistic perspective not only exists, but has been revealed to us. God has communicated his plan for history to man through both general and special revelation. So, on the Christian view, we are able to possess a somewhat holistic perspective on reality. Skepticism can be avoided. Anyways, that's all for today, guys. I hope you learned something. If you can, feel free to check out my book, The Folly of Unbelief, where I expand on this argument and similar arguments for the truth of Christian theism. Cheers.